Good morning. Before we jump into the message this morning, I want to make sure that you know about something that's going to be happening here on August 17th. Our church has been given the incredible opportunity to host 200 freshmen from Southern Wesleyan University. That means there will be 200 freshmen in this service. Now, that also means we need 200 chairs for them to sit on. And one of those chairs may be just the chair you're sitting in. And so we're asking people from our 11 o'clock service if they would come and maybe try out our 9 o'clock service or our 10 o'clock service so that we'll have seats for all the freshmen that will be here that day. And as you're coming and going, smile, say hello, get to know some of them. We're so thrilled to have the opportunity to have them here as part of our church community on that morning. This morning, we are in the middle of a series called Lockdown, and we've been using the image of a ball and chain to describe what it looks like to be in spiritual lockdown. And the very first week, Pastor Tom told us about a specific ball and chain, this one. It was found in England a couple hundred years ago, and it weighs specifically 18 pounds. Now, if you were to have this ball and chain on you, you may be able to carry on with your normal life because it wasn't intended to keep you from moving. It was to hinder unrestricted movement. You could go on with your life. You would just have to get used to dragging one foot along behind you. And we also said that God's desire for us is freedom from lockdown, and his desire is not for us to continually struggle with sin. And the sin that we're talking about are those sins that become patterns of behavior. God's desire for us was not a partial freedom, but a complete and a total freedom from sin. I'm going to start this morning by giving you the entire message in one sentence. You are welcome. You can go to sleep after this. Not really, please don't. The sentence is this: when good things become ultimate things, ultimately, good things lead us to lockdown. Now, I'm going to ask you to say it with me so we all get this together. When good things become ultimate things, ultimately, good things lead to lockdown. Now, if I were sitting in your seat right now, I would be thinking, why don't you just call it the anti-fun message? Good things, lockdown, this is going to be a great 30 minutes. And I understand your concern because when I was growing up, to me, I thought God's idea of fun was maybe chuckling as he painted a rainbow in the sky, or maybe laughing as a bunny hopped around a field, and maybe he was grinning when he made me Tom's assistant. I know the more I get to know God, the more I've come to find out that he is actually the giver of all good things. Anything that is fun or exciting, anything we look forward to, anything that really just makes us happy to be alive, somewhere at its core, it was a creation of God's. And I also need you to know that I would not be the one to bring you the anti-fun sermon because fun is one of my core values. It doesn't necessarily mean I am the most fun person you know. It just means that fun is really important to me. I tend to measure the success of an event by, did everyone have fun tonight? And in my filing cabinet for about the last 8 years, I've had a file. And it is called my happy file. And this file contains letters and cards and emails, some of them from people here in the room. They're things that make me laugh or make me happy. And the reality is that every single one of us has this happy file or a list, things that bring enjoyment and excitement to our lives. And I know this because I created and conducted a very scientific experiment. I used Facebook to ask people if they would to tell me the things that made them happy. And the list really could be summarized into kind of categories. Things like relationships, food, nature, traveling, poetry, vacationing, fulfillment in your work. You might add to that seeing your favorite band or sports team live. Maybe the first time you got to take the car out by yourself. Maybe when you save and splurge and go to your favorite restaurant. Now, a lot of people also mentioned a very special creation of God, the coffee bean, which, when roasted and ground and brewed to perfection, is one of the ultimate reflections of God. Unless it was roasted and it was brewed with water from Clemson or Anderson. You have a ruined mocha at that point. Now, a lot of people also mentioned food, and I know God's in favor of food because that's how he started things out. He started out by making trees that gave Adam and Eve food. And then Jesus, he's recorded eating bread, drinking wine. Wesleyans skip over those parts. He's recorded grilling fresh seafood. And I also know that God's in favor of food for two other reasons. One is he ate laying at low tables. And let's be honest that kitchen chairs are not comfortable at all. And the second thing is that Jesus wore robes while he ate. And I refuse to believe this is just a cultural thing, because I want you to imagine eating your favorite meal with no tight waistbands. God knew how to enjoy food. Good gifts were intended to allow us to see God's character, how funny, how awesome, how holy, how beautiful he is. But when good things become ultimate things, ultimately good things lead us to lockdown. This morning, we're going to dive into a story that has more drama than your favorite TV show. And we're going to learn about a man named Solomon, King Solomon. King Solomon's dad was the legendary King David. And at the end of David's life, he hands the kingdom over to Solomon. But he also gives him with the kingdom a set of blueprints. He gives him the blueprints to build the temple of God. Solomon will finally be the king that builds God's temple. And he also is going to give him some building supplies, specifically 370 tons of gold, some precious metals and other gems, things that he had taken from his own treasure, and things that the people of God had just willingly given so that they could be a part of building the temple of God. Now, Solomon settles into being king. He marries a princess from Egypt. Solomon and all the leaders come together, and they're having this massive worship celebration. It goes on for days. And one night during the celebration, God comes to Solomon. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I'll give it to you." Now, this is a question, because he can ask for anything. But what isn't lost on Solomon in this moment is that he is now in charge of more land than he's ever seen, more people than he'll ever be able to count. He's in charge of an army. And his dad was a good leader. And Solomon does not want to mess this up. And so Solomon says to God, "Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" And the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. "I will give you what you asked for. I will give you wisdom and understanding, a heart such as no one else has had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame." Now, that worked out well, because not only is Solomon going to be crazy smart, he's going to be crazy rich and famous. So exactly what more could he want? What more would we want? And this is the part of the story where I begin to identify with Solomon. Not Solomon the king, but Solomon the man. Because somewhere along the line, something begins to happen inside of Solomon that you and I can understand. because all of a sudden, Solomon comes to the realization that there's something missing. All the stuff isn't doing what he thought he would do for him. Even though he has all the stuff and he had this relationship with God, he starts to wonder what it would take to actually feel alive at the soul level. You know that moment when your thoughts, they start to roll and everything gets quiet? Maybe it's at night. And you can't escape the fact that somewhere deep inside of you, something isn't there. There's this hunger or this thirst for something else that you thought you should have, you thought you would have, but it just seems to be missing. All the promise that Solomon started his kingdom with, it wasn't enough to guarantee that he wouldn't end up in lockdown. And Solomon decides that he's going to do something about it. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Solomon has just made a decision to conduct a systematic experiment. He's going to think of everything that has ever brought him joy or pleasure, satisfaction, contentment. He's going to take all of those things, but he's going to take them to the max. Now, as a kid, I was fascinated with a certain show because this show gave me a glimpse into the lives and into the world of people I just couldn't have ever fathomed. The host would start walking through these homes and he'd tell you about the owner, and you would be able to see all of their luxurious and amazing things. Now, in the early 90s, as I was sitting in my home watching this show, you may have been sitting in your home watching with me. And if that is the case, you will be able to finish the intro line with me of the show. The show started out with music. And then the host, thank you. And then the host would say, I'm Robert Leach, and this is Lifestyles of the... Thank you. Now, for some of you who are a little younger, that may have been creepy, but you had a show that was, well, it had a similar point, not the same show. And it aired on the Wholesome Network, MTV, and this show also gave a glimpse into the lifestyles of the rich and famous, but this show was called, all right, which you were not watching. You just knew people that were watching. These shows did the same thing. These people took all of their fortune, all the stuff that they had, and they created our standards of luxury. But if Solomon were to watch these shows, honestly, he would have thought their lives were pretty lame. And after he's finished his experiment, he looks back and he wants to tell us what it is that he tried. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. And Solomon isn't saying that laughing is foolish. He's talking about the time when everyone's laughing, but no one's really having fun. And laughing and fun a lot of times involves other people. So Solomon decides, why not throw a party? Why not throw a massive party? And you know, sometimes at a party, someone will say something before they do something stupid, or they get someone else to do something stupid, and they'll yell out, "You only live once." Solomon invented that phrase. Folly means that thing that sounded awesome, but after you did it, it wasn't awesome, and you realize that you only do live once and that you can't take it back. Now, you may have attended some rowdy gatherings. You may have some incredible backyard barbecues, but Solomon, his parties were legendary. There are no red Solo cups or even fine china at Solomon's party. Every plate, every cup is made with gold. There could have been more than 30,000 people at each of Solomon's parties. And it's going to take a lot to feed all those people. So for one day, it was going to take this much food: 5.5 tons of fine flour, 11 tons of meal, 10 grain-fed cattle, 20 range cattle, 100 sheep, and miscellaneous deer, gazelle, and roebuck, and choice fowl. Because what's a party without roebuck? Now, let's say that you want to kick things up a notch. You want to have a party no one is ever going to forget. Why not try live animals? And that's what Solomon does. Monkeys and apes. The Bible says Solomon had monkeys and apes. And let's be honest, monkeys and apes are when you know that you've gone too far. This is over the top. It's a backyard filled with every toy you can imagine. But at some point, the party stopped being fun. The monkeys and apes stopped smelling so great, and you can only eat so many grits and gazelle steaks. And we all know what it means for too much to not be enough. We understand overspending, overeating, overdrinking, overtalking, overpowering. Too much doesn't fix the problem that's inside of us. Solomon had started out with something good, because isn't there something about people getting together, people having fun when no one wants to really go home? Isn't there something about all of that that is a reflection of God's character, a reflection of his community with us? Solomon moves on with his experiment. I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and planting beautiful vineyards. And now Solomon decides he's going to make his mark on the world. He is going to try hard work, success in building a career. So he spends 13 years building a palace for himself, and then he builds a palace for the queen. Then he builds cities and fortresses and cities for his horses. But all of a sudden, the building, it just starts getting boring. So he decides to try something a little more zen, a little more creative. He starts to garden. Now, Solomon's idea of gardening is a little different than ours. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. It's not just a little backyard garden. He's making parks and forests, and then to water them, he's going to have to build giant reservoirs. And doesn't nature usually bring peace? You know, Solomon remembers this peace that he used to have. It was this peace he couldn't really explain, and now it's just gone. And he keeps searching and he keeps looking, but the peace just seems to elude him. And we understand when work and creativity and success and accomplishment, when checking something else off the list, when we thought all of that stuff was going to make us feel fulfilled, but really we just look around and we're disappointed. Now, it's easy to distance ourselves from all the grand things Solomon's done. And it's going to be even easier to distance ourselves from all the things he's about to do. But we have to be honest and ask this question. If I had all the money, all the power, and I was really smart, what would I do? How far would I go? If no one ever told me no, and I had a deep soul longing and soul thirst for something that was missing, how far would I go to find what was missing? Solomon liked all the stuff that being rich could get you. How much was going to be enough? I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone else in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And in all this, my wisdom stayed with me. That annoying wisdom reminding him that the experiment was not working, that every time he tried something different, it was just another chain, just another weight, and it was getting harder to walk around. Now, herds and flocks are not really that impressive to us, but I want you to imagine private jets and cars everywhere. And male and female singers, this is a little weird, but I want you to imagine your favorite band, your favorite singer, they come to your house anytime you want them to. Now, Solomon also knew that in his world, lots of wives and people you owned meant you were important. So instead of one wife, Solomon decides to have hundreds of wives. This is not only going to make him important, it's going to secure political safety for his country. And he decides it's his right to own people, including 300 concubines. Because here's the problem. Lockdown, it exchanges that idea, what was originally meant to be fully known and fully loved. It exchanges all of that for immediate pleasure. And it starts out that we're just excited to get that text message, and then all of a sudden we have to hide our phone from our spouse. It's just one more website, just one more morning where we wake up with a pile of regret. Because lockdown has led to a soul wounding, something deep inside of us that has not been fixed. Did you know that wealth isn't actually bad? If it is, we're all in trouble. Because I want you to imagine this morning, the population of the entire globe is walking through your house right now. They're checking out your stuff and going through your closets, and as they leave the front door, they get to see your pay stub. Now, as dissatisfied as you and I may be with our house and our stuff and our cars and our pay stub, to a great majority of the world, we belong on lifestyles of the rich and famous. And see, we understand what it's like to say, maybe just one more raise. That will get rid of my stress. I'll be able to get that thing I've really been wanting. People will think I'm important. There's got to be a reason they call it financial freedom. Because maybe some more finances will finally provide freedom. If I could just grow my retirement account, that safety net, I would just stop feeling so stressed. But Solomon did not find financial freedom. What he found was that pieces of his soul and pieces of his kingdom were missing. Not only is Solomon rich, he's smart. He writes books, over 3,000 proverbs, over 1,000 songs. But all the journaling, all the success, wasn't explaining to him why something was still missing. And we all know what it's like to think that a diploma or the highest grade on a test, that those things are going to finally make people proud of us, finally open the doors that we need to get ahead. I read this quote a week ago it's just been rolling around in my brain, and I want to share it with you. Author Jeff Mannion asks, will the enjoyment of these blessings, will they stir or will they eclipse my affection for the giver? And the question has served as a gauge for me to start thinking about the blessings in my life. As I look at them, do I find that they are stirring, or do I find that they are eclipsing my affection for God? What are the things in my life that when I look at them, I see, wow, that reminds me of who God is. God must be like that. God, you've given me these things. Where am I tempted, or have I already taken the blessings, grabbed them for myself, and ran? If Solomon could speak to us today, I don't think he would be gentle. He understands what it means for good stuff, for gifts, to become twisted and distorted and stretched. Things like our job, our hobby, our kids. And then all of a sudden, we find out we're in debt. We're in over our head. We've spent too many hours at the office. Too much time obsessing over our success, our weight, our finances. I think Solomon would desperately want us to hear his words. Yet when I surveyed all my hands had done, what I had toiled to achieve, everything, all of it was like I had been chasing after wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. The gifts that started out as good and fun seemed like if I just took one more step towards them, I would be able to control how much of that gift I had. If I could just grab all of it and work and chase, then I would know fulfillment. But the problem with lockdown is that we see the darkness of what's on the other side of when blessings are no longer gifts. John 10:10, and Jesus says to us, the thief comes only to steal, to kill, and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And Pastor Tom told us in the very first week of this series that verse is a choice. We have two options. We have life to the full, and a life that is destroyed. God's desire for us is and always has been and is today life and life to the full. Matthew Henry describes this freedom and this life this way. He says that we may have life as a criminal when he is pardoned, as a sick man when he is cured, and as a dead man when he is raised. Solomon could always have had this. That life to the full. He started out with this kingdom on a common trajectory. They were going to build the temple. He started out with a relationship with God. And somewhere along the way, the good things became ultimate. He chose to invest his time, his energy, his wealth into building and amassing collections. And steal, kill, and destroy didn't just become the wounds on his own soul. Steal, kill, and destroy were who he had become to the people he ruled. At the end of Solomon's life, he has taxed and enslaved his own people, the people of God. And they are now paying for, and they are now building 700 idols, 700 places where his wives can worship their foreign gods. Because our balls and chains become something that we drag around. They become something that eventually hurt the people we love. And Solomon, he looks out onto these hills, and they're littered with idols. They stand as a testament to someone who took good gifts over the giver. And he tells us these things will never fill you. What you crave is the presence of God. You crave nearness to him. And in the very last chapter of Ecclesiastes, on the very last page, there's this glimmer of light. Because all this wisdom that Solomon hasn't been able to get rid of, Solomon's going to use all of that, and he's going to give us the conclusion. What was left after his experiment? And I imagine each one of us, to differing degrees, knows what it is to live in lockdown. And we at the least are interested, if not desperate, to know what Solomon has to say to us. And when all is said, when all is done, here's the last word. Worship God with reverence, the one true God, and keep his commands. For this is what God expects of every person. Solomon's last words aren't a statement from a tyrannical God just telling you to obey him. This verse can be translated into lots of different ways, but I'd like to give you the Beth paraphrase. We serve an eternal God who created our souls and who wrote the manual how we can live with soul satisfaction. And when we acknowledge and surrender to God, creator and redeemer of the universe, we find ourselves wanting to be with him, wanting to know more about his love for us, wanting to grow in our love for him. All people crave the ultimate giver of all good things. And today maybe you are sitting here and you are done with lockdown. You are tired of being hungry and thirsty for something that you just can't find the answer to. But I know that I also have friends today who, for you, freedom is frightening. Because lockdown is at least familiar. We would know what to expect from lockdown. And maybe this morning you're living out part of Solomon's experiment, but you're just hoping it's going to end differently for you. But I can tell you that it won't. Solomon tells us that it won't. People in this room can tell you that it won't. At some point, all the gifts don't fill what only the giver was supposed to be to us. And at some point, we look around in our lives and we wonder if any of it really matters, if any of it is going to last. But I can also say with confidence that on the other side of lockdown, God has so many good gifts for you. There is more for you than just struggling with sin. There is more than just wondering if there's meaning in any of this. Outside of lockdown, our lives aren't just a breath that will someday fade away. My son has told me that he is never going to kiss a girl because of germs. And my daughter has told me that she's never moving away. She's going to live next door to us forever. Now, is it possible that God has something more in mind for them? Is it possible that someday Will might fall in love with and even kiss the most perfect girl God has ever created? And is it possible that Bree may decide someday to travel the world? Could it be that they falling in love, that seeing the world, that it could stir in them an affection for God? Our definition of satisfaction is so small compared to what God has for us. And the trouble with lockdown is it makes it tough to see the blessings. Lockdown has us redefining what a blessing is. Freedom is something that's available all the time. Freedom is something where you hear the click of a lock and then you hear chains crashing to the ground. Freedom is giving God the gifts that we have twisted and stretched and watching him put them back together. Freedom is knowing the truth that we have been covered with grace and no longer have to live in shame. Freedom is finding contentment in what we have and not looking to the blessings of others. Life after lockdown is life and life to the full. We start finding out that these blessings had a higher purpose. They were meant for so much more than we could ever have dreamed. We get to be part of his plan for redeeming the world. Our blessings mean that we get to be part of freeing others, of healing homes, of reaching communities. We get to be part of bringing beauty and fun and enjoyment and peace. We are reflecting his love to the world around us. Life was meant to be more than just struggling with sin. God's plan, God's offer for us is freedom. My challenge for you this morning is to courageously look at the whole of your life. Are the gifts and blessings you have stirring, or are they eclipsing your affection for God? Are you searching for a contentment that seems to be just around the corner but can never really be found? Are you hungry and thirsty for a soul satisfaction? The answer is that freedom is actually here today. Life and life to the full is the offer that's on the table. Freedom starts with our surrender. And freedom means that any chain we've walked in here with today, we can leave without it. Pray with me. Father, we pray that your truth would be this light that magnifies our souls, shines into the places where we are, the dark places, that we are able to see who we are in light of you, God. God, I pray for freedom from lockdown for our hearts today. I pray we would find in you life and life to the full. We thank you for being the giver of all good things. God, let us see your reflection in the gifts and the blessings that you've given us.